Hey buds, how's it going? I am MC and today I am going to be doing a little sketchbook session. I have this messy drawing that I did of a gladiator in my sketchbook, and as usual I'm going to be doing the line work and rendering just to finish up the illustration. I'm one of those people who is really fascinated by ancient Rome and ancient history in general, so obviously I really like the original Gladiator movie, and the new Gladiator movie that's coming out is kind of what inspired me to do this drawing. But yeah, if you're working on something or just want to grab your sketchbook and draw along with me, let's get into this drawing, and I'm going to just talk a little bit more about the history of gladiators while I do. So this drawing was obviously inspired by the very famous scene from the first Gladiator movie, where Maximus yells, "Are you not entertained?" to the crowd after he wins a fight in the arena. I used a screenshot from the film, so I referenced Russell Crowe's posture directly, but I wanted to be a little creative and just kind of draw my own version of a gladiator. I think gladiators are one of the things that intrigue me the most about ancient Rome. I'm always trying to learn more about them, and I've actually found it really hard to find a single reference that's a good and somewhat detailed summary of everything about gladiators. But I think that also might be me just asking for too much, because I think part of the problem is that there's probably just not as much surviving information about gladiators as I'd like there to be. But I feel like for the last little while, I've just been collecting all these little fragments of information, and I always get really excited when little anecdotes about gladiators come up in different things that I've read or listened to. So with the new Gladiator movie coming out and sparking the inspiration for this drawing, I thought that it would be the perfect time to go back and put some of those fragments together into one place. And maybe other people would find the information interesting as well. Why sing the wonders of the Egyptian shore? Let far-famed Babylon be praised no more. Let not Ionia vaunt Diana's fane, nor let the Carian town exalt so high its mausoleum hanging in the sky. In Caesar's amphitheater are shown those rival glories all combined in one. Let fame henceforth her clamorous tongue confine to sing the beauties of that dome divine. This is a translation of the ancient Roman poet Martial's epigrams on the spectacles, or because it's more fun to say everything in Latin, de spectaculis. And what he's basically saying here is that the seven wonders of the world combined can't compare to the Colosseum in Rome. This book of epigrams by Martial was written for the games that were staged by the Emperor Titus to open the Colosseum. Titus and Domitian were the sons of Vespasian, who was the emperor that originally commissioned the construction of the Colosseum, but unfortunately didn't live to see its completion. And just a fun side note, Vespasian's full name was Titus Flavius Vespasianus, and he was the first of the Flavian dynasty of Roman emperors. So the real name of the Colosseum is actually the Flavian Amphitheater, and because it's more fun to say everything in Latin, the Amphitheatrum Flabellum. It didn't get nicknamed the Colosseum until the Emperor Hadrian moved a 98-foot statue, the Colossus of Sol, which was originally the Colossus of Nero, next to the amphitheater where it took on the similar name. The first gladiatorial games were held in 264 BC by Decimus Junius Brutus as part of his father's funeral games, where 3 pairs of gladiators fought. And for about 200 years they remained almost exclusively as parts of funeral processions until the late Republic, where more people started to use gladiatorial games as propaganda and to gain political favor. As gladiatorial games increased in popularity, so did the size, and this was when the Roman Senate, in an attempt to preserve the Roman Republic, started creating laws around how many beasts could be imported to Rome and how many games could be held a year, just to try and avoid rich men who could afford to put on games from gaining too much popularity. So a guy like Julius Caesar held funeral games for his father 20 years after he died. And you can decide if you think that was because he really loved his dad or if he had different motives behind putting these games on. In the early years of gladiatorial games, they would have been held in venues originally made for other purposes, but as they grew in popularity and the scale of the events increased, they began commissions for arenas and other structures that were built specifically for the games. In his book, Hadrian and the Triumph of Rome, Anthony Everitt says, quote, "A recent calculation allows us to estimate the total of 400 gladiatorial venues across the empire. Perhaps, on average, 2 shows a year were staged at each of them, featuring teams of about 30 gladiators would each fight twice. This would have meant about 12,000 fighters in total, and perhaps 4,000 were killed annually, a death rate of 1 in 6 per show." Crazily enough, there were actually people who would volunteer themselves to be gladiators with the hope of earning fame and fortune through it. Gladiators were often treated like rock stars. They were loved and celebrated, but at the same time they held the lowest social standing of Roman citizens. Gladiators were classed as infames who had no social rights. They were considered basically the same as sex workers and actors, so people who sold their bodies for the entertainment of others, and they were seen as less than for it. So people who volunteered themselves as gladiators were basically giving up their rights and giving up their social status to become an infame as well. Other than people that volunteered themselves to be gladiators, they were usually criminals condemned to death and possibly fighting for a pardon. They were slaves, and a lot of the time those slaves would be prisoners of war or captured enemy soldiers. The training a soldier would receive during their time in an army would usually translate very well to fighting in the arena. It could be a benefit to the gladiator themselves, but also to the audience, as a more experienced fighter would put up a better fight and probably put on a better show. Some of the most popular gladiator classes were actually those that were modeled after soldiers from different enemy armies. So like the Murmillo gladiator, which was modeled after warriors from Gaul, which would be modern-day France, and then the Thrace gladiator, which was modeled after soldiers from Thrace, obviously, which modern day is basically the area in Europe where Greece, Bulgaria, and Turkey touch. And a popular part of the games was actually dressing up gladiators as members of certain armies and reenacting famous battles that had been fought by Rome or in mythology, with a little more focus on putting on a good show rather than worrying too much about the historical accuracy of the actual event. This is actually something you can see in the trailers for Gladiator 2. There's a part where you can see the center of the arena has been flooded, and this kind of display was called a pneumachia, which literally means naval battle. The first pneumachia we know of was hosted by Julius Caesar during his triumph, and this was depicting a battle between the Egyptians and the Tyrians, where he had thousands of combatants and rowers perform, and they were all prisoners of war. Historians don't actually know if it was possible for them to have actually flooded the Colosseum, but ancient sources do say it happened, so yeah, we'll just kind of have to wonder how they actually did it. Mock combats would also be held on dry land. In Petronius's Satyricon, he mentions a battle where a female gladiator fought from a Celtic-style chariot, and it's possible that this could have been a reenactment of the British revolt against the empire during Nero's reign. The gladiatrix in the chariot would be playing Boudica, the queen of the Iceni tribe, who was a queen who managed to rally multiple tribes and led a very large and nearly successful revolt in Britannia against the Roman Empire. Because history is always written by the victor, we don't have a ton of information on Boudica, but what we do have is very cool, and it's very interesting to see a story where a woman was so successful in a leadership and military role in antiquity. She was motivated by wanting revenge for her 2 daughters who had been raped by Roman soldiers. So she's actually often depicted in her chariot with her 2 daughters under her arm as she rides into battle. This is a statue that's actually in London that you can go see. But anyway, going back to the gladiators themselves, The men, and more rare, but sometimes women as well, they would all be sent to gladiatorial schools called ludi, where they would swear an oath basically signing away their rights to the owner of the school, the lanista, and offering their bodies to the ludus and whatever horrible things may happen to them as a gladiator. They would be sorted into their gladiatorial classes and then assigned trainers for that specific class, as well as working with retired gladiators who had experience in the arena as well. I'm not going to go too in-depth into gladiator classes in this video because I'd really like to do much more focused research into each gladiator type and do illustrations of each of them. So that's a series of drawings and videos that I'd really like to do in the near future. But anyway, gladiators would spar in the ludus using wooden swords called a rudius. I think that's how you say it. And the training would be done in rehearsals, kind of practicing fighting like a routine. And they would also practice how to die properly and where to deliver killing blows to their defeated opponents. Even though gladiators had such a low social class and had to basically swear away the rights to their body to the ludus and the lanista that owned them, it's assumed that it would be much more beneficial to have them treated at least decently while they were in the ludus. It would be in the best financial interest of the lanista to make sure his gladiators were well fed and well rested, because if they were, they would obviously be able to put up a better fight, put on a better performance, and give them a better chance at survival, which would mean them fighting again and bringing in even more money for that lanista. There's even evidence that in some cases gladiators may have been oiled and massaged after workouts. And we also know of circumstances where very popular and successful gladiators lived outside of the ludus, like the Murmillo gladiator called Spiculus. Spiculus was the Emperor Nero's favorite gladiator, and he was gifted an estate by him. So even though as a gladiator he was still enslaved and under the control of his lanista, he was given a separate place to live and a place where he was basically served by other slaves. Spiculus started his career in Pompeii, where graffiti records, quote, "Spiculus the Neronian, a beginner, defeated and killed Actonictus, a free man with 16 wins." I couldn't find a number of how many fights Spiculus himself actually won, but everything just says that he was very good at killing people and he also just seemed to enjoy doing it as well. But this success would have made him very popular in ancient Rome. And on game day at the arena, there would basically be merch tables, so you could buy things like figurines, lanterns, wind chimes, and glasses with your favorite gladiators painted on them, or ones that would just depict an exciting fight that had happened. We have 57 pieces of gladiator glass, and 13 of those pieces depict a fight where Spiculus defeated a gladiator called Columbus. One of my favorite things about learning about ancient history is just all the little things that make me realize how little we've actually changed as people over time. Like, I think back to watching the Disney movie of Hercules and the musical number Zero to Hero, where everybody's buying vases and figurines and sandals and drinks with Hercules on them. And when you watch that, you kind of just think it's a fun little thing they've added in there to try and help people who are watching now relate back to the time. But these things actually happened, and people have always wanted to buy merchandise and memorabilia of their favorite fighters and performers or moments in sports. And I just think that's so interesting. And there are a few more things that I want to get into in the arena that are so similar to the way we run things today. If we go back to the inaugural games at the Colosseum, it was an amphitheater that was made for 50,000 spectators, and even though these games would have been open to the public due to the excitement and popularity of them, they would have actually been really hard to get into. These games lasted for 100 days, and each day pretty much followed a normal game day routine. The person that ran any set of games and most likely paid for them was called the editor, and the editor would have to work long in advance to plan a day of games. They would have to set up a contract with a lanista or ludus and discuss the number of fighters that they needed as well as their skill level to be able to determine a price. And then they would advertise the show, having posters painted with the necessary information for an upcoming event, the date, the location, how many pairs of gladiators would fight, and highlighting any other features that would be available during that day of games. Programs would be created for the day with the schedule of events, and all of the gladiators would be listed in order of appearance with their records next to them, so that just like today, this kind of thing would allow people to weigh the odds of certain fights and place bets on which gladiators they think would win. And then the day would be separated into 3 parts. The day of games would start in the morning with the venationes. This is where animals would fight other animals, as well as the venatores, who were beast-fighting gladiators, would fight them in staged beast hunts. And then on slightly lower key occasions, they would just have animals in the arena performing circus tricks rather than being killed. Dio Cassius says that during the 100 days of opening games at the Colosseum, over 9,000 animals were killed. Animals like lions, leopards, elephants, crocodiles, ostriches, bulls, bears, boars, a rhinoceros, and more all fought against each other and against gladiators in the arena during these games. The only animals that Romans didn't actually like to see killed during these shows were elephants. For some reason, they saw that elephants had a much higher intelligence level than other animals. And presenting a new animal at games that an audience had never seen before obviously brought a lot of excitement, and this was also a good way for the empire to basically show their strength with how much they had conquered and how far out they had been able to expand into the world. After the morning beast hunts would be the midday executions. These weren't marquee events, but more used as filler in between the beast hunts and the gladiatorial combats later in the day. And during the executions, spectators might have gone to eat or taken another sort of brief intermission before the afternoon spectacles. The criminals might have been executed by gladiators, crucified, or condemned to death by beast, damnatio ad bestiae. And similar to mock battles, sometimes the executions would be staged to resemble a death that had occurred in Greek or Roman myth, with the criminal dressed up like the mythological character just to be killed by whichever beast was appropriate for that story. In his epigrams about the inaugural games at the Colosseum, the poet Martial that I mentioned earlier wrote about the execution of a criminal playing the role of Prometheus, hanging from a cross and being attacked by a boar until his death. And then after these executions in the afternoon would be the munera. The word munera literally means duty, and this would include the mock battles, the pneumachia, and one-on-one or group gladiatorial combats. And then just like today, this is where the primetime events of the games would be held and the most popular gladiators would fight. So the gladiators would be paired off based on their class and skill level. They would fight other members of their own class, but often they were mixed and matched with another type of gladiator that would contrast and complement their fighting style. So like a slower and more heavily armed gladiator might have been put up against a lighter armed and quicker gladiator, with both bringing their own disadvantages and advantages to the fight and hopefully adding a little extra tension and excitement to it. And spectators could identify themselves as a fan of either of these types of gladiator. A scutari was someone who liked a heavily armed gladiator, and a parmulari was somebody who liked a lighter armed gladiator. During the inaugural games, Martial also mentions a fight between two gladiators, Verus and Priscus. At the end of this fight, Titus, who would have been the editor in this situation, decided the result to be a draw. He declared both men winners and awarded them their freedom with the presentation of a wooden sword. This is just like Proximo receives in the original Gladiator. And the thumbs up or down that's given by Commodus in the movie is actually the way that it would have been done in real life as well. Although we're not entirely sure if the thumbs up meant live and the thumbs down meant die. It's also possible that it was the reverse and that the thumbs up was meant to be the editor pointing to his neck, signaling the killing blow, and the thumbs down was pointing to his sheath, signaling for the gladiator to put away his weapon. In a moment like this, the editor was in total control of the show. He would get to decide whether the surrendering gladiator would live or die. The crowd would get involved, either cheering for mercy or for another execution, and the editor would consider this, as well as the quality of the fight, how nobly the gladiator faced their death, and maybe even a sign from the gods before making his decision. A gladiator was meant to be stoic and accept their death with dignity. This was staying true to the oath that they swore in the ludus at the very beginning. And the more that you seem not to care about dying, the more likely it was that you would be kept alive. But sometimes even the gladiators who were spared during their time in the arena still had a high chance of dying backstage, either from their injuries or because of some sort of infection after the fact. And along with the idea of gladiators having merch tables, one of my favorite things that happened during the inaugural games of the Colosseum was an ancient sort of t-shirt toss. Sparsio Missilium was the throwing of wooden balls to audience members. Dio Cassius writes in his histories, quote, Titus also furnished some things that were of practical use to the people. He would throw down into the theater from aloft little wooden balls variously inscribed, one designating some article of food, another clothing, another a silver vessel, or perhaps a gold one, or again horses, pack animals, cattle, or slaves. Those who seized them were to carry them to the dispensers of the bounty, from whom they would receive the article named. I think this is so cool. Obviously not the part where you can win a person in a t-shirt toss, but it's just crazy how much sports have evolved. Like, we have so many less horrific sports that we can watch today, but it's crazy that when we go to these sporting events, we're still participating in the same things that people did 2,000 years ago. People have always picked their favorites or the ones that they hate, and we've always fallen in love with the athletes that we watch. Everybody back then wanted to be a gladiator wag. In Pompeii, there's graffiti that says, Cleatus the Thracian makes all the ladies sigh. In his satires, Juvenal lists all the deformities a gladiator called Sergius has, but he finishes it by saying that it doesn't matter because being a gladiator can make anybody an Adonis. And Tertullian, who was an early Christian writer, said, quote, Truly they go down to the very beasts for the motive of display, and see themselves as more beautiful from their bites and their scars. And to me, this sounds like a hockey player talking about not having his two front teeth. I've been talking about gladiators for a very long time now, and I could probably keep going, but I'm really hoping to continue this series and do more research, and I'm sure I'll get to go over a bunch of things that I missed and didn't get to include in this video. I'm going to put a kind of informal bibliography in the description of all the books that I referenced while making this video, so you can check out any of those if you're interested. And just a side note, out of all of those books, I really recommend A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum by Emma Southon. It's not a book about gladiators, it's about murders in ancient Rome, but it's so interesting and really witty and entertaining. But anyway, I'll be quiet now and let you watch the little bit that's left of this drawing. And there is the finished gladiator. For this one, I didn't really focus on any specific style or type of gladiator to draw. I just wanted to take some creative freedom and do my own thing with this guy. Like I said in the voiceover, I do plan on doing a larger series where I focus in on the specific types of gladiators, their armatures, their fighting styles, and doing more illustrations of them. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you were entertained. Take care, and you'll see me in the next one.